This is my Axpona 2024 show report, best of the show. First of all, this was the largest audio show I've been to yet. I was here last year, and I think it was even bigger this year. Saying that there was a lot to see is an understatement. It was truly a lot to take in. There was definitely loads of stuff you only would get to see and experience at Axpona, as I covered some of these products that weren't even on their website yet. This video is going to be long, so please feel free to use the timestamps to jump to the parts you are most interested in, but I highly recommend watching the entire thing as I carefully picked the best rooms that I thought were interesting. Anyhow, the food was also really good. I had a really good time, and man oh man, I have some juicy audio madness to show you guys. But remember, this is a show setting, so these are just short impressions of the rooms as a whole, and it will not be an in-depth discussion on sound. Goal of videos like these are always to provide insight to those that couldn't make it to the show, and also entice you to come next year. Starting with something affordable that totally blew me out of the waters. These Elac BS312.2 bookshelf speakers. Tiny and cute bookshelf speakers, but don't let the size fool you like it did for me. The first thing I did when I walked into this room was walk around to find the subwoofer. Not like in a joking way or complimentary way. I was legitimately looking for one because the bass authority, punchy, and sheer dynamics coming out of these speakers were just unreal for their size. And for a 4.5-inch woofer, the extension was quite unbelievable. Also, with the Elac's Jet 6 Air Motion tweeter, it had a very clean mid-range and high-frequency presentation even at loud volumes. But what stood out to me after I calmed down from the excitement with the bass was the soundstage and how spacious these little speakers sounded. It wasn't even driven by some crazy high-end gear, just some Elac components. And I have to say, for $2,000 a pair, these speakers absolutely took me by surprise. Talking about surprises, two of the brands that I personally use as a reference in my system right now showcase something totally cool and new at the Axpona show. Firstly, MonAcoustic. What is this thing? Well, let me explain. What you see on the top is the Platimon VC1 bookshelf speakers that I picked as the product of the year for 2023. It still is one of my favorite speakers that I use as a reference on a daily basis, but guess what they added? Yep, a bass module. But hold on, these are not just any bass module, and I am not sure if you can even call it that because the VC2 not only has a 10-inch bass driver that is actually their first driver they designed in-house, but also adds what they call a harmonic tweeter. It is basically a super tweeter, but has a number of configurations so that it's like having multiple tunings of your specific taste and environment. It is too long to explain just in this video, but thankfully I did a full interview in that room, so make sure to check that video out. Link will be in the description below. What stood out to me about this room was the sheer amount of speed and detail that was perfectly separated. From strings to vocals, it all sounded great, with more extension in the bass from the VC2. And going through all the settings, my favorite setting was the 3.5-way configuration, as it still retained that mid-bass of the VC1 with the widest soundstage and more extension from the VC2 for a complete Platimon sound. Okay, the second brand that was showcasing something new that I personally use was the makers of my reference turntable, Pure Fidelity. These guys make some of the most gorgeous looking turntables, but this time around, they were introducing the new Savant Tonearm, which is a heavily modified version of the famous PU7 arm by Audio Origami. The cool thing about this arm is that it is super beginner friendly, and even if you are a seasoned pro, you will appreciate the easy, fast, and convenient way to set up this arm in just a few minutes. I interviewed John, who is the founder of Pure Fidelity, so make sure to go watch that video in the link description below for a more in-depth explanation. But I also heard their top-of-the-line enterprise Tonearm, which is 2 steps above the Tonearm I am currently using on my Pure Fidelity Harmony turntable. But I wasn't too familiar with the gear and speakers in there, so all I can say was that the room sounded really good, spacious, and natural as a whole. However, in the room that had the Savant Tonearm, the new Tonearm, I had some very familiar Mod-Right gear and Alta audio speakers that I know very well, and I could tell that the Savant Tonearm was no slouch, And in fact, I think I actually might prefer it to my illustrious SE Tonearm, despite the price point of the Savant Tonearm being slightly less. And why I say that is if what I heard in that room was correct, I felt that the Savant Tonearm had a more eluding tonality, especially in that mid-range that reminded me a lot of the mid-range I heard on my Lin turntables in the past. Okay, next we have to talk about Acora Acoustic's insane new speakers. Yes, this is not just a concept model, but their new model that they will be selling. If you thought the look of these speakers were insane, the sound was even more insane. The amount of bass they were pumping out and pressurizing the entire space was absolutely nuts. And we were in one of those bigger rooms too. The treble was fast, transparent, and crispy, but was a little too hot on some tracks, personally, for me. But that was because they were really cranking these speakers loud to showcase how clean they can play at higher SPL levels. And man, they can. Acora Acoustics have been known to make some great sounding loudspeakers out of different types of marble, but this is their new gemstone series, and the gemstone you see here is amethyst. The top module here is the SRB model, which uses 1-inch beryllium dome tweeter and the 5.5-inch modified ScanSpeak drivers. Priced at $55,000 for the gemstone version you see here, but they do have many other models at different price points. For example, the base black granite model would be $18,000. The bottom base module is new and is able to go down to 16 Hz with the modified 12-inch ScanSpeak drivers in the back, according to Acora Acoustics. The total price of the speaker configuration here was $85,000 and it sounded as insane as it looked. Definitely one of the highlights of the show for me. Yes, the price is kind of wild, but you are also not going to find a company that goes to their lengths to make speakers out of gemstones, and technically, you can get the speakers for far less money if you don't care for the glowing gemstone look. Okay, coming back down to something that costs quite literally less than the tax you would pay on the most of the speakers at the show, the Eversolo and Starke Sound room, which of course had the Eversolo streamers that have been largely popular, but also Starke Sound was introducing their new Beta 7 bookshelf speakers. Of course, I did an entire interview video covering everything in the room in detail, so you should definitely check that video out, but this room sounded freaking amazing, man. Like seriously, they tricked me. When I asked about the price, they made me guess. And they didn't tell me if I was wrong or right. In fact, they gave me the impression that my guess was right in the ballpark of what it was going to be. You can actually see my real surprise reaction in the video when they told me it was about $1,000, including the matching stands. I was floored as the bass, texture, extension, and the high frequency refinement I heard was the best I've heard in this price tag, even at a show setting. I asked to turn off the subwoofer because I was convinced they were on, but they weren't. Now, I am not sure how much of this is due to their new A3 amplifier, as that is on a different price point altogether, approximately $8,000, I believe. But what was familiar to me was the Eversolo streamers they were using. And after hearing a few tracks, from what I could tell, they were a fabulous match to the new Beta 7 speakers in terms of synergy and sound signature. And I don't think that was an accident, considering that the Eversolo and Starke Sound have worked closely together to bring out the F2 amplifier. What really got me excited was the P7 loudspeakers that had a horn-loaded AMT tweeter. My god. As great as the Beta 7 speakers were, when the P7s turned on, everyone in the room went, ooh. The sheer body and projection of sound into the room was something to behold. The P-series from Starke Sound isn't new, but it is the first time being introduced to the North American market, and I cannot be more excited about trying this speaker in my room in the near future. Now, another speaker that was introduced at the show and was something that everyone wanted to know about was the new SourcePoint 888 from MoFi. Of course, this is an Andrew Jones design. This speaker rides the success of the SourcePoint 10 and 8 that was released last year, and the 888 adds two paper cone woofers on top of the 8-inch dual concentric design that Andrew Jones has been known for. And when I heard them in the room that you see now, it had many speakers and gear, so I wasn't getting much of an imagery. But I did go into another room at Axpona, and I was definitely able to appreciate the amazing phase coherency, imagery, and extended bass that these speakers provided. All in all, I found that the 888 was definitely fuller, more musical, and maybe because of that bass presence and added extension, I found the 888 to sound warmer, more pleasing, and impactful than what I had heard with the SourcePoint 8 and 10 last year. For $5,000 a pair, I thought it was certainly an incredible value option to go with, considering that the SourcePoint 8 is about $3,000 for the pair, and if you were to add quality subwoofers, you would easily end up past that $5,000 price point. And yes, from what I heard at the show, I didn't think that they needed a subwoofer in a small to medium sized room, as they were easily extending down to the 30Hz region. Also, those paper cone woofers are definitely a plus in matching the natural tonal characteristics of the 8-inch dual concentric driver, and yes, it is a bit less sensitive and needs slightly more power than their single concentric driver counterparts, but still at a really easy to drive load and sensitivity that it really isn't a downside. I think this is perhaps my favorite design by Andrew Jones yet. Okay, next is a brand that I've been looking to review for a while now, Grypon. These gigantic speakers are Grypon Audio's flagship loudspeakers called the Kodo and retails for $390,000. Insane loudspeakers. I mean, look how tall these speakers are compared to my friend Adam standing beside it. I really wanted to hear these loudspeakers, but to my surprise, they sadly were not actually playing these loudspeakers, but just on display. But thankfully, I did find a room where they were actually playing a Grypon loudspeaker. These might not be the Kodos, but they were definitely one of the most impressive sounding speakers I've heard and seen at the show. These are the Grypon EOS 5 loudspeakers that are new for this year and retails for approximately $50,000. Still not a small chunk of change, but it's kind of crazy to think that it's not that far off from the tax you would pay on the Kodos. Anyways, the EOS 5 loudspeakers were being driven by the Diablo 333 amplifier, and it sounded amazing. Really delicate high frequency with the sweetness I look for in my trebles, but with ultra refinement and smoothness like a finely polished metal surface. The bass was full and robust when demanded, but when playing tracks that required a little bit more delicateness and subtlety, it provided those qualities like a really well designed mini monitor would. Soundstage was deep and wide even at a show setting, and I was truly impressed with the overall sound of this room. Oh, what are these? Yes, CSS was there demoing the flagship Typhon loudspeakers, but who cares about them anyway? They are so last year's news. I just want to say here that while I won't go into the sonic details, as for those of you that didn't know, the Typhons are a collaborative project between me and CSS, but I will shamelessly say, you know how the Grypon EOS 5s were basically tax money for the Kodos price tag? Well, the Typhons here are basically less than the tax money on the EOS 5. So, just saying. Okay, but moving away from the Typhons, CSS was also showcasing their new 3TDX floor standing speakers. These come in a kit currently and are priced as low as $2,000 for the base option, and if you want the upgraded crossover and the flat pack, then you can go as high as $3,800. This new kit is their most high-end kit offering as of now, I believe, and since I have zero involvement with any of their designs outside of the Typhons, I can describe what these sounded like at the show, and man oh man, just like the 1TDX bookshelf speakers I reviewed, these were some serious bang for the buck, really shaming a lot more expensive speakers at the show as CSS always usually does. Being driven by the Orchard Audio Ultra GONFET Class D amplifier, this system was simple but filled the room with sound that was impactful with crystal clear highs. The vocals and the mid-range always has that slightly richer and warmer tone, but mostly balanced, the classic CSS house sound, but the thing that stood out to me immediately, even from their other models, was the sheer amount of impact and dynamics that even gave the Typhons run for their money. So if you were short on budget for some really nice towers, but aren't afraid to roll up your sleeves and do some work yourself, these 3TDX I think would be a kick-ass option. Yes, these are the speakers by a company called Consierge Audio. And what a fun way to make a speaker's aesthetic really pop. These speakers are a fully active, or better to say, a system on its own, since not only does it run on 3 active amplification that powers the bass, mids, and highs separately, but also has the ability to process and playback music without any external component, and also do things like room correction. These are called the RMS1, and it's really the only model they make, but with many different finishes that all look gorgeous. And what's crazy is that these are panels that are interchangeable, meaning you can literally swap finishes in minutes according to Consierge Audio. It's really cool that some of these finishes involve actual artist work as well, and I thought they not only offered the most beautiful and creative finishes I've seen in hi-fi in a long time, but I also thought they sounded incredible. Yes, the sound was very phase coherent and imagery was on point with that dual concentric driver in the front, but the bass that was coming out just simply did not make sense to me. No matter how I looked at it, I thought it was impossible for a single dual concentric driver to be creating this visceral gut-digging punch and dynamics, but also a very deep extension. And I was right. Going around to the back of the speakers, there are 6 6.5-inch woofers that handled the bass. I will add that the sound I heard was really lightning fast and incredible attack and decay, with an incredible spatial information, spacious sound, but at the same time, I did find the sound to be slightly bit clinical for my personal liking. Price-wise, it ranges from $75,000 all the way up to $85,000 depending on the finish you choose. Talking about lightning, fast, transients, attack, and decay, Borresen revealed their first of the new C line with the C1 stand mount speakers. Now, I filmed an entire exclusive reveal explanation video by the designer Michael Borresen himself, so make sure to go check out that video. But this room had a long-lasting impression on me as me and my friends constantly talked about how great the C1 sounded throughout the show, despite this room being the first room we visited. I'll keep it simple and honest. I just reviewed the Borresen X2 loudspeakers on my channel and was thoroughly impressed that I was considering the X6 for one of my personal references. After hearing the C1, I am in a huge dilemma because I did not expect to love the C1 this much. I know people were asking how it compares to the X series and if there was in fact any significant difference in sound, and I will say, as a person who had a significant time with the X2 loudspeakers in my own listening room at home, the C1 just simply sounded better to me and on a whole different level in almost every way imaginable, even at a show setting. Now remember, just 2 weeks ago where I am in this video, I was over in Montreal where I had a chance to listen to the X6. I think the X6 definitely had bigger scale and dynamics due to its sheer size and number of drivers, but when it came to the refinement of those finely detailed music passages or the snap of a snare or a strum of a guitar that required right amount of finesse but also refinement, the C1 simply handled everything that mattered to me in the mid-range and the highs to more of my satisfaction than even the X6. I definitely look forward to reviewing the C series after I take a look at the X1 bookshelves in my upcoming review, so that I can finally decide which Borresen speaker model is the sweet spot for me. Next room was the MACO room displaying the Macarius loudspeakers I reviewed on my channel. Truly a beastly open baffle speaker, but I won't get into it too much as I already reviewed the speaker, so to go to the link below for my full review of the sound and what these speakers can really do. And also I made an entire video on the updates and actually a pretty cool review from the attendees, you guys, at the show, expressing their honest opinions of the MACO room and what they heard. Link in the description below for you to check that out as well. Now I will say though, I am really digging this new polished finish they are offering, which makes them look more glossy and finished. Sound-wise, they sounded awesome, but I definitely felt that it sounded a lot better in my personal listening room, and I did feel that the speakers were definitely limited by the hotel room. Now, I really can't imagine the reaction of the people that were so happy with the MACO's room if they were to have a chance to listen to them in a more properly set up room. I think they may finally achieve nirvana. Lastly, there was a trend of many open baffle speakers at the Axpona show, but there were only a few standouts for me personally, and so far, the MACO Macarius were the best sounding open baffle speakers, even at a show setting. Another open baffle speaker company that I found particularly exceptional was the open baffle speaker by Pure Audio Project. These guys make some very reasonably priced, great sounding open baffle speakers. Now, I did do a full interview with the designer himself, so go check that video out. But essentially, what stood out to me was the easygoing, warm, but open nature of these baffle speakers, and the fact that they are modular. And what I mean by that is that the front baffle themselves are modular, and you can add or take away from the speakers to go up or down the line depending on your room size and needs. They also offer many different types of drivers, from single drivers to horns. Also, the crossover is modular in the sense that they make it easy, really easy, for you to swap out and change different components without soldering, as you just simply use these screw terminals instead. I thought it was a really fun and easy way to get people into trying different cabs, and really this is a tweaker's dream in my opinion. Also, they introduced the new Trio 10 with the heel motion tweeter, and yes, I did cover this exact speaker when I was in Montreal 2 weeks ago, but hearing this speaker for the second time in a different room gave me a more solid idea on the speaker, and overall, I thought I actually preferred this loudspeaker even compared to their 15-inch models loudspeakers in the other room. And yes, both were warm and rich sounding with great openness, but I felt the AMT tweeter really added some life and finesse to the sound that I really found more extended and pleasing. Another open baffle speaker that stood out to me was the Clayton Shaw's Caladan open baffle loudspeakers. Now these retail for $3,000 and are relatively new. These use two 12-inch mid-bass woofers and a silk dome tweeter on a 1.5-inch thick hardwood baffle. To me, immediately it sounded full, warm, musical, but coming from the Pure Audio Project's room, I thought the Caladan sounded even warmer and richer in comparison. Now, I have no idea if it was the smaller room, and I'd imagine so, but also I didn't find it as spacious or open as the other open baffle speakers I've heard at the show. And while I thought it sounded more musical than a lot of the other rooms I've been to, the clarity also seemed a bit lacking to my ears. I would love to eventually try and test these speakers in my room, as their tone and musicality was awesome, but I definitely felt that they were held back a lot by the show setting. Now this was a surprise. You guys know I go to shows and sometimes I have these aha, I found a hidden gem moments, like I did with the AGD Gauntlet designs and so on. And these were one of those moments. So these are the PS Audio FR5 bookshelf speakers being showcased for the first time, if I am not mistaken. Now for some context, about 2 weeks prior to this event, I covered the PS Audio's FR10 loudspeakers and was thoroughly impressed, but the FR5 at $3,500, I think it really took my heart. Even at the show setting, this room sounded full, warm, rich, yet with incredible spaciousness, musicality, and just the right amount of detail and finesse. I thought I was hearing a flagship speaker from PS Audio, to be honest with you. I did not expect it, but the FR5 simply took me by surprise, and I think it is perhaps my favorite PS Audio product to date. And yes, that includes even some of their components that I love also. Now seriously, don't be fooled by its size. This speaker is not only equipped with a planar magnetic tweeter for the delicate and refined delivery of the high frequency, but it is also equipped with a passive radiator in the back that just simply allows the speaker to light up and fill the room, and we weren't even in one of those smaller rooms. I think this speaker will seriously take the market by storm once people get to listen to it and get the reviews out there, because it simply is the best speaker I've heard at this price range, and that was even at a show setting. In fact, I would be just as happy if they just sounded exactly like they did at the show in my room. Gauder Acoustic wasn't one of those brands that was new to me at the show. They are a German brand and they seem to manufacture everything in-house at their factory. I also did an entire interview with the designer himself, whom I found very interesting in the approach they take into designing their speakers. First of all, the speakers you see here are the Dark 250, and they make their speaker cabinets out of aluminum ribs, and it's a 4-way loudspeaker with a diamond mid-range and high frequency, and woofer transducers modified to their specifications by Akuton. If you know about Akuton drivers, you know that they are not exactly the cheapest drivers, but definitely one of the most well-designed high-end drivers. Marrying that with the aluminum rib cabinet structure and being made in Germany, the Dark 250 is priced at $250,000. Interestingly, however, the designer seems to put more emphasis on the properly designed and calculated crossover designs, which also uses high-quality parts from brands like Mondorf. The designer also emphasized and was proud of the fact that their speakers can be matched to any preference and any room, as the mids, highs, bass, treble, and even the bass extension of the bass can all be adjusted to fit the room and taste of the listener, which is pretty insane. In terms of the sound, this was the best sounding room for me at the show, along with the Audio Group Denmark room I talked about earlier. They played different types of music, from rock to jazz to EDM to classical, in this room while I was there, and they all sounded fabulous with incredible impact and room-filling musicality. I thought they would sound a little bit thin for my liking when I first glanced at the diamond tweeter units, but it did not sound lean in the slightest for me, as they sounded really full, and I really enjoyed how refined, sweet, and delicate the high frequencies came across without a hint of harshness. They had another room showcasing the Capello 100 loudspeakers, and these were really amazing as well. They sounded really full, inviting, and all while being incredible in how it handled the treble. It wasn't exactly on the same level as the Dark, but the authority and the musicality was nothing short of amazing. Price tag is still hefty, around 20,000 euros, but they do have an entry line called the Axpona that starts around 2,000 euros, and I am definitely interested to check those out in the near future. Next was the Rosso Fiorentino Siena loudspeakers with the AGD gear. Now, I reviewed the Sottotto loudspeakers before and was thoroughly impressed how it was able to give me all the details and nuance with a nice warm tone, and this was no different. The Siena speakers really gave the sense of depth and emotion in this room, and paired with the AGD Grand Vivace amplifiers, which I also reviewed, it simply melted me into my seat. I've said this before, but I think AGD amplifiers are an amazing synergistic match with Rosso Fiorentino speakers in general, and what stood out to me was simply the amazing layering that really added to that musicality and the feeling of being engulfed in the performance. Maybe it was the familiarity of it all, but if I wasn't so busy running around at the show, this would have been the room to just sit down, turn on some tunes, and relax, as there is not a hint of offensive harshness or brittle tones to speak of. Warm, inviting, yet with all the details and spatial cues, especially in the deep depth in the soundstage. Absolutely, hands down, one of the most musical rooms that I've been to at Axpona. Next room was Advanced Paris with the PMC speakers, and this small yet sensible priced system sounded really great to me. Especially in a smallish room like an apartment, I thought this system made a lot of sense. Don't be fooled though, this system was pumping out some mad bass when demanded from the PMC's transmission line design, and the Advanced Paris seemed to have no problem, not even breaking a sweat, driving them with authority and power. More than anything though, I just loved the appearance of the VU meters of the Advanced Paris, and definitely look forward to reviewing them in the near future if chances allow. This room had the PMC's flagship Finestria loudspeakers that I heard on multiple occasions, and it still impresses me every time I hear it. The sheer dynamics and scale of this gigantic loudspeaker is just insane. I did a full interview of this room as well, and the link will be in the description below, but the attention to detail they have brought to this loudspeaker really is impressive. Now, from my past experience with Finestria, I also know that the wrong pairing of amplifiers can really be detrimental to the overall performance. But that was not the case in this room, being driven by the Esoteric gear. My god, I wasn't sure if I was more impressed with the PMC speakers or the Esoteric gear, as the sound was so authoritative but delicate at the same time, with lots and lots of emphasis on authority, and just gut hitting. Maybe it was because it was in a smaller room than I would imagine them being in, but somehow still sounded awesome, and I didn't think it overloaded the room, but I did wish I got to hear them in a bigger, larger space for sure. Now the next room also had Esoteric gear, a more simple two-box system running the Amphion's flagship Grypon 3X loudspeakers. I did a full interview with this room as well with Esoteric and Amphon, so go check that video out. I think it gives a lot of insight. When I was visiting this room, unfortunately the hotel had a Wi-Fi problem and a lot of the systems were down, including this one. But from the little of what I heard before it went out, just freaking amazing. I can go on and on about the depth and the width and how the vocals sounded sweet and lots of meatiness, but I will just say this about this room. It just sounded natural, like I was hearing a real life event rather than a playback from a speaker system, and that's truly rare at a show setting. I wish I got to hear more of it. T+A was also at the show. They are a German brand, and they had their Solitaire S540 flagship loudspeakers with their M40 HV monoblock amplifiers. This line array design of the loudspeaker, along with the unique valve design of the M40 HV, made this system sound pretty amazing. It honestly came across as more of an analytical masterpiece to me in how quick and fast it was in the treble and bass. But when the track was changed to a vocal track with instrumentals in the mid-range, it sounded warm and inviting. But maybe it was the room, maybe the setup, but me and my friends found it odd how narrow the sweet spot was when it came to imaging. If I moved my head to the left or right by an inch, the center imaging would disappear and I would hear more from the one channel. Outside of that though, I was really impressed with the precision engineering by this brand that just really oozed out of the products by just looking at them. Again, sitting dead center with perfect imaging. Overall, a little too analytical for my personal liking, but the sound overall was one of the fastest and snappiest with good inviting mid-range tones, which is an odd but pleasant tone that I found to be a rarity. This room right here was the Consonus tied loudspeakers. This speaker can be fully active or it can come in passive if you choose to use your existing amplifiers. But these were interesting in how they use planar ribbon from 220 Hz and up in a dipole configuration and a 9.5-inch electrodynamic woofer also in dipole configuration. On top of that, it also incorporates a sealed subwoofer into the design. When me and my friends first came across this room, it was pretty empty with some weird elevator music playing, so we requested some rock. And my god, these speakers started pumping out dynamics and rooms started filling up with people right away. It sounded full, dynamic, and the ability of the system to really punch hard with control and clean bass was just earth-shattering. But when demanded with delicateness and refinement, those planar ribbons did an excellent job. It wasn't as refined on some hard rock though, and I did feel that the speaker's high frequency favored more towards well-recorded music rather than everyday music. But all in all, I was thoroughly impressed with the dynamic speed and the cleanliness of the sound without getting too harsh or brittle. Alta Audio was also at the show showcasing their new Aphrodite's loudspeakers. I also did a full interview of the first look at these new loudspeakers with the designer himself, so make sure to go watch that short video to know more about the design. But while it may look similar and does in fact share some design approach taken by the Consonus loudspeakers we talked about earlier in that it does utilize dipole configurations of transducers, Alta Audio Speakers' specialty is in the hybrid subwoofer that utilizes both ported and transmission line to create a deep textured earth-shattering chest-pounding bass like you would experience in real life. And that's what I got. Outside of the Amphion room that I thought to sound really natural and lifelike with the esoteric gear, this room was probably the only other room that I thought it sounded not only pleasant and room-filling, but the tone of the instruments and details came across to me as open and effortless as when I go to enjoy live concerts. Only thing I will say though is that the sound was more forgiving, smooth, and relaxed than some live concerts I've been to, but I think that's for the better, especially if you want to enjoy the system for long lengths of time. Estelon was also showcasing their Forza loudspeakers, also utilizing modified Accuton drivers. The Forza is a flagship series loudspeaker out of Estonia. As I was listening to these loudspeakers, the first thing I noticed was how sexy they looked. But the second thing I noticed was how sweet the tone of these loudspeakers were, especially in the vocals. It was tingling my ears. Layering in the depth of the soundstage reminded me a lot of the Rosso Fiorentino loudspeakers, and the perfect separation reminded me a lot of the MonAcoustic room. They happened to play a very familiar track that I know very well, Bird by Dominique, and I was floored by how composed the bass notes came through, but also the sweet tingly tone of her voice that I was so familiar with, yet portrayed through the Forza speakers in such a more sweet, delicate, and emotional way. Yes, the dynamics were there in insane amounts when demanded, but what really got me was the effortless and clean yet emotional presentation of the mid-range with this system. Now, when I just thought I couldn't get more impressed with vocals, I came across this room with the Vandersteen Kento Carbon loudspeakers. Behind the grill, which is supposed to be on while playing, this loudspeaker features a 1-inch transmission line loaded carbon dome, 4.5-inch mid-range transducer, 6.5-inch mid-woofer, and two 9-inch aluminum subwoofers with a 400-watt amplifier with a power factor correcting switching power supply powering the two subwoofer units. Now this video is already too long to go into the specifics of the drivers, so I will suggest you go to their website if you're interested to learn more about their patented perfect piston technology. But what I heard was nothing short of excellent. The thing that stood out to me was the powerful vocal tones that reminded me of ProAC speakers. There was a certain vibration of the vocals that could not only be heard, but felt, which is very rare. Mid-range was overall on the warmer side of neutral to my ears, very inviting, but with great amount of detail and separation within the soundstage. I also found the width of the soundstage to be quite exceptional in this room as well, especially considering that this wasn't one of the bigger rooms. One of the rooms that took me by total surprise was the KMD engineering. KMD Engineering is a Korean company, and it looks like they are far more than just a high-end hi-fi company. They were showcasing their OCS 1000 CEG flagship loudspeakers, and without me saying anything, you can see they mean business. First of all, I learned that each of these modules move separately so that it can be adjusted for perfect time alignment to your sitting position. I mean, this is simply nuts, and I've never seen anything like it. When they played some complex orchestral passages for me, I was floored by how it felt almost exactly like the time I was at an orchestral concert. The complex passages seemed less complex somehow due to the well-separated and micro and macro scale of dynamics that came through effortlessly with perfect timing and placement to my ears. More than anything, the scale of these speakers were deceiving in that they are big speakers, but there are far more bigger loudspeakers in the market that I've heard. Yet, I've yet to hear such a large scale from a loudspeaker design. I mean, are we still calling these loudspeakers? I'm not sure anymore. They also make a range of other lower models that employ the same design philosophy in the time alignment in space, and I can't wait to check them out to review on my channel in the future if chance allows. Equally as impressive was the Vivid Audio Room showcasing the Gaia loudspeakers on a full display, and first thing I say will be that, what edge diffraction? This design seemingly should remind you of the BMW Nautilus loudspeakers, and that's because the designer, Lauren Sticky, was in fact the designer for BMW before he moved on to make his own mark with the Vivid Audio brand. The thing that stood out to me in this room, other than the unique design that I am sure is painstakingly hard to make, was the amazing imagery and how the speakers just seemed to disappear despite the fact that they are quite large loudspeakers. If imaging and placement of instruments like you can draw it out is important to you, these seems hard to beat, and by the far best imagery I've heard at the show. Even at a show setting, these were in a medium-sized room and they were able to portray the performance as if it was drawing it out right before my eyes. Absolutely stunning work of art and engineering, and if you know anything about speaker design and Lauren Sticky's work, then you will know how much of an engineering masterpiece this loudspeaker really is. Some companies really took the meaning of transparent to a different level. These speakers are by a brand in Germany called Perfect 8. And yes, these are glass speakers, but normal glass wouldn't be ideal for a speaker cabinet. So I found it odd, but after a closer look at the glass, I noticed this glass is quite thick, and I am no glass expert, but just seemed different from the everyday glass I see. Turns out this is a very specialized type of glass that the Perfect 8 company calls super silent glass, or SSG. Now, before you turn your heads and think that this company just gave it a special name to some normal thick glass, they do have a set of measurements and studies to show how their specialized glass handles cabinet resonance and vibrations in general, better than MDF or even HDF, they say. I don't see this model on their website, but this model is supposedly called the Cube T and features a force-canceling woofers. Price is approximately $60,000 for the pair. I mean, this room had some clean, unreal dynamics, especially in terms of pressurization. The treble was a little bit hot on the top for my personal liking, but imaging was great and it seemed very face coherent. Yeah, what stood out to me in this room has to be that bass. It was very much a you amount of bass, but all in a controlled manner, somehow. So I found myself in this room, right? And I sat on the second row and just almost had my jaws to the ground, but the gentleman in the room insisted that I have to sit in the front row, and so I did. Now, my jaws were literally gone. Incredible dynamics, just incredible spatial cues, and it was very much like the Borresen C1 room, all over again, but with more of everything including speed. Incredible pounding clean, and I mean clean dynamics. Drums sounded real, and I play drums, so this was even more realistic than the Daniel Hertz system I heard back in Montreal. This felt like I was getting hit across my body with a stick. I could feel it in my chest and my ass. Micro details were just absolutely insane as well, even at lower volumes, and the layering and music around me and to the side, this definitely did not even feel like a show setting or a normal traditional stereo setup. I had to wonder if this is how it sounded like at the show, how would it sound in my room? The highs were so crystal clear and brought me back to the time I visited Danny's listening room at GR Research with the NX Streams and found the highs to be crystal clear but with no hint of brittleness. But imagine that now with even more crystal clear extended highs, but again with no hint of brittleness or brightness. It felt like my ears were just cleaned out or something, or my ears suddenly got a superpower to hear an octave higher. The speakers were from Jensen, but the highlight of the system apparently was the Bosch from Theoretica Applied Physics. Now this is a digital audio processor that essentially has a lot of technology packed into it to create a stereo into a 3D specially accurate playback. The technology was impressively apparently developed at Princeton University. Again, which is impressive. But take a closer look here. You see that camera? I thought that was there to capture reactions, so I made some funny faces. Imagine my shame and disappointment when I found that that was actually there to track my head in real time to render the 3D playback. Now, it all made sense why the rep in the room insisted for me to sit in the front seat for the full experience. ATC was showing off their anniversary SEM20 ASL speakers and C4 subs Mark II, which comes in this gorgeous blue finish and Napa leather on the front baffle. There's a lot to love about this limited series here, and the 150 people that will own these anniversary versions would be very happy with both the sound and the finish of these. This is a fully active system with amplification built in, and one thing about ATC is that they are famous for designing and manufacturing their own drivers in England under very high standards. The result was a warm and musical sound, but was not lacking clarity at all when required. Soundstage was wonderful and large, and it was a full-body experience that felt very inviting and easy to listen to. And so that's it as far as my coverage goes. If you stuck around to the end of the video, I want to sincerely thank you. You are a true audio nut like I am. I also want to give a special thanks to my audio coverage crew this year that really went above and beyond to help me out at the show. Without them, this video would have not been made possible. So sincere thank you to Joseph, Suat, and Adam. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this video and appreciate the efforts by me and my team to bring you these show coverages, please click that like button and subscribe. Until next time.
Oh, trying to keep up the energy just to do anything in here, for real. So what has Jay done? Look at this. He's got this rig set up for shooting. All this stuff set up at the desk. But it wasn't bright enough, so this man, like, wait, can we use this light? How do we get this light over here? So we move the light over, but the cord's too short. So we use the other lamp as an extension cord for the other lamp. And now the man's exhausted.
I don't know how I'm gonna do this interview at 7, bro. Oh, God.
You'll figure it out. I think you always do.
Oh.
That's hilarious. But hey, man, at least the video will have good lighting. Kudos. Kudos to that.